All right, so today we're going to dive deep into something called the National Taxpayer Advocate 2025 Purple Book.
Okay.
Have you heard of this before?
I have heard of the Purple Book, yes.
Okay, cool. So I was not super familiar with it before researching for this episode, but it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's basically like a whole list.
Wish list.
It's a wish list.
Yeah.
Exactly, like a toolbox of
Yeah.
ideas to improve the U.S. tax system and try to make it fairer and, less of a headache for people.
Make it work for the taxpayer,
Yeah, exactly.
not just the government.
Yeah, so this is coming from the Taxpayer Advocate, which is an independent organization within the IRS.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting that, like,
It is.
they're kind of like this...
Internal watchdog.
Yeah, exactly. Like an internal watchdog to make
Yeah.
sure that the IRS is actually, like, serving the people that it's supposed to serve.
Mm.
And so this Purple Book is full of, like, changes to all kinds of things, like how refunds are processed and what happens when you mess up on your taxes and how to make programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit or the EITC easier for people to actually use.
More taxpayer friendly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So should we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the very first recommendation in this Purple Book is kind of a bold one.
Okay.
It says that they want to put the Taxpayer Bill of Rights right at the beginning of the Internal Revenue Code. Like literally the first thing you see
That's interesting.
when you open up this massive legal document.
I like it.
So what do you think about that?
It's an interesting move because it's like it's not just symbolic, right? It's like shifting the power dynamic,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Imagine like you open this up, this huge legal document,
Yeah.
and the first thing you see is a list of all your rights as a taxpayer.
Right.
Like that sets a different tone right off the bat.
Yeah, it's almost like saying like, hey, we know dealing with taxes can be intimidating.
Yeah.
So here's a reminder that you have rights and we're obligated to respect them.
Exactly.
Do you think that kind of like symbolic shift could actually lead to better treatment of taxpayers?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It could certainly raise awareness and maybe even empower people to stand up for themselves if they feel they're being treated unfairly.
Right.
But real change requires more than just words on a page.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so let's move on to something a little more concrete.
Okay.
The Purple Book proposes a hard deadline for the IRS to process refund claims.
Right?
So right now there isn't one,
No, there's not.
which means people can end up waiting months for their money.
Which is crazy.
Which is crazy. Yeah, and that can be a huge problem if you're like relying on that refund
to make ends meet.
to make ends meet or like to pay your bills or whatever.
Especially these days.
Exactly.
With inflation and everything.
So they're proposing a 12-month deadline,
Okay.
which, is still a long time.
It is a long time, but
At least it's... So,
at least it's something.
yeah, so you're not just like left in limbo wondering.
Right, like waiting indefinitely.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of things that could be helpful for taxpayers,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about tax preparers.
Okay.
It's kind of wild that right now there are no minimum competency standards for paid preparers.
Yeah, just like the Wild West out there.
It is, yeah. Like anyone can hang up a shingle and say they can do your taxes,
Scary.
even if they have never taken a single accounting class.
You're trusting them with your most sensitive financial information,
Right,
potentially making decisions that could have a huge impact on your tax liability.
exactly. So the Purple Book wants to change that, and they're recommending mandatory competency testing for all paid preparers.
Makes sense.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah. Like you wouldn't want someone operating on you who hadn't passed their medical exams.
Exactly.
Right.
But they don't stop there. They also want to give the IRS more power to revoke the ID numbers of preparers who have been sanctioned.
Oh,
So essentially like delicensing them.
that's where it gets a little trickier.
Yeah.
While it could help weed out bad actors and protect taxpayers from incompetent preparers, it also raises questions about fairness and due process.
Right.
Could it be too easy to unfairly target certain preparers?
That's a good point.
There's a real need to balance consumer protection with the rights of tax professionals.
Yeah, you can't just like, get rid of all the bad preparers.
Right.
There's got to be some kind of process and fairness involved.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the Earned Income Tax Credit.
Right.
This is a program that's designed to help low and moderate income working folks get a tax break.
Right.
But it's notoriously complicated.
So complicated that a lot of eligible people don't even claim it,
Right.
and others who aren't eligible end up claiming it by mistake.
It's a mess. So the Purple Book is tackling this complexity head on, and they suggest that the EITC be split into two separate credits.
Okay.
one for individual workers and one for families with children
That makes
to
sense.
make it easier to understand.
Simplifying things is always good,
Right.
especially when it comes to taxes.
Yeah, anything to make taxes less confusing.
Absolutely.
I like it. Um, and they go even further. They also propose to raise the age limit for certain individuals to qualify,
Okay.
which could be a game changer for young adults,
Interesting.
especially those facing homelessness or aging out of foster care.
Those are the folks who could really use a boost.
Exactly.
Like the
Yeah.
EITC could really make a difference in their lives.
Okay, let's move on to a topic that's sadly becoming more and more relevant these days.
Okay.
Protecting victims of scams.
That's a big one.
It is, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
scary thought. But you could be a victim of a financial scam for years and not even know it.
Exactly. And by the time you discover it,
Yeah.
it might be too late to claim a refund.
Right, because of the statute of limitations.
Right.
So the Purple Book proposes eliminating the time limit for claiming refunds related to newly discovered theft losses,
Wow.
which I think is a really big deal.
It is.
It's basically saying like, hey, we understand you might not realize you've been scammed right away, so we're not going to punish you further
Right.
by imposing an arbitrary deadline.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah, and this is especially important given the rise in sophisticated scams targeting vulnerable people.
Absolutely. It recognizes that the victims of these scams
Yeah.
often face enough hardship without being penalized by the tax system, too.
For sure. Okay, last one for this section.
Okay.
The Purple Book addresses something that I find pretty troubling.
What's that?
The way the IRS handles collection actions.
Oh.
So they actually have an algorithm that can identify taxpayers who are likely experiencing financial hardship before taking actions like a lien or a levy,
Interesting.
which is great.
Right. Sounds helpful.
Sounds very helpful.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. They're not required to use it.
Oh, wow.
So the Purple Book wants to change that, and they're urging Congress to mandate the use of this tool to prevent vulnerable taxpayers from potentially devastating financial consequences.
It seems like a no-brainer.
It does, right? Like, why wouldn't you use a tool that could prevent people from, like, falling into deeper financial distress?
Right. Especially when it's the IRS taking those actions.
Especially when it's the IRS, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like they have the power to really mess up people's lives.
It raises questions about the IRS's priorities.
Yeah.
You know, are they more focused on collecting every last dollar, or are they also considering the well-being of taxpayers who are already struggling?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the Purple Book is advocating for a more humane approach, which I think is really encouraging to see.
Absolutely.
So those are just a few of the many recommendations laid out in this Purple Book.
I'm already impressed.
I know, right? It's pretty amazing. And we've only just scratched the surface.
We have a lot more to unpack.
We
Still
did.
Fascinating.
It is, and we're going to keep diving deeper into this Purple Book in the next section.
Can't wait.
So stay tuned.
All right. Makes you wonder if, like, sometimes one hand doesn't know what the other's doing over there. Especially when you consider all the other stuff in this Purple Book.
Yeah.
Like, we've only just scratched the surface here.
Right, we've only talked about a handful of the 69 recommendations that they've laid out.
It's a lot.
It is, yeah. It's like they went through every single aspect of the tax system.
Yeah. It's like they took a magnifying glass to the whole thing.
Exactly. And they're like, how can we make this better for taxpayers? How can we make this more fair?
And these are just random ideas, right? These are coming directly from the National Taxpayer Advocate.
Exactly.
Whose job is to represent you,
You, the listener. Yeah.
taxpayer within the IRS.
Yeah. And they see the problems firsthand.
They're in the trenches.
They are.
They see it all.
Yeah. So they have a really unique perspective on what needs fixing.
Yeah.
That's why I'm finding this whole deep dive so interesting.
Me too.
It's not just about learning about potential changes to the tax code.
Right.
It's about understanding how those changes could actually impact people's lives.
Exactly. Like, for example, that proposal to set a fixed deadline for the IRS to process refund claims.
Yeah.
Think about the stress and uncertainty that would eliminate for people who are waiting on that money.
Especially if you're in a tough financial situation.
Yeah, no more wondering when am I going to get my refund.
Exactly.
They'd have a clear time frame they could plan around.
Yeah, that would be huge for so many people.
Absolutely.
And then there's that recommendation to make competency testing mandatory for all paid tax preparers.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
Right now, it's like...
It's the Wild West out there.
It is, yeah. Anyone can call themselves a tax professional.
Regardless of their qualifications.
Kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. You're trusting these people with your financial information, making decisions that could have a big impact on your tax liability.
So requiring some level of competency testing would at least ensure that they have a basic understanding of the tax code
Right. At least they know what they're doing.
and can prepare accurate returns.
Yeah.
Would you want someone operating on you
No.
if they hadn't passed their medical exams?
No way.
It's the same kind of thing
Absolutely.
with your taxes.
Yeah, you want someone who knows what they're doing.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Okay, and how about that idea to simplify the earned income tax credit by splitting it into two separate credits?
Oh, yeah. That one's great.
One for individual workers and one for families with children.
Simplifying the EITC is crucial
Yeah,
because it's a program that's designed to help low and moderate income workers.
right.
But its complexity often prevents those who are eligible from actually claiming it.
Hmm.
So splitting it into two separate credits
Yeah.
could make it a lot easier to understand and navigate.
I love that idea. Anything that makes taxes less confusing for people is a win in my book.
Absolutely.
Okay, and speaking of removing barriers,
Yeah.
that proposal to eliminate the time limit for claiming refunds related to newly discovered theft losses.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
That's huge, right? It acknowledges that victims of scams may not realize they've been defrauded right away,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives them the time they need to seek justice.
It's fascinating because the current system
Yeah.
can actually penalize victims twice.
Right.
First by the scam itself,
Oh.
and then by the tax code.
If they miss the deadline.
If they miss the deadline to claim a refund.
Double whammy.
It is. So this change would help to rectify that injustice.
Yeah. It's like they're finally recognizing that the tax code shouldn't add insult to injury.
Exactly.
Okay, and then there's that recommendation to require the IRS to use its financial hardship algorithm
Oh, yeah, that one's important.
before taking collection actions.
Imagine being in a situation where you're already struggling financially and
Yeah.
then the IRS comes after you.
With a lien or a levy?
Yeah, it could push you over the edge.
Absolutely.
So mandating the use of this algorithm
Yeah.
would help to ensure that the IRS is taking people's individual circumstances into account.
Right. It's just the humane thing to do.
Absolutely.
It's not about letting people off the hook.
Right.
It's about recognizing that sometimes life throws you a curveball,
Yeah.
and the tax system shouldn't make things worse.
Exactly.
It's incredible how many issues the Taxpayer Advocate has identified and addressed in this book.
It's a lot.
They've really thought of everything.
It's impressive.
It really is a testament to their dedication
Yeah.
to taxpayer rights and fair tax administration.
They're not just sitting in an ivory tower.
Right. They're out there talking to people.
You're in the trenches.
Yeah, they're listening to people's concerns and fighting for change,
Exactly.
which is why this purple book is so important.
It is.
It's a reminder that we have a voice
Yeah.
and that we can push for a tax system that is more just,
More equitable.
more equitable, and more responsive to the needs of everyday people.
And they don't just highlight problems.
Right.
They offer concrete solutions.
They do.
They go into detail about how these changes could be implemented,
Yeah.
which shows that they've really thought this through.
Yeah. They've put a lot of work into making these recommendations feasible.
Absolutely.
I was particularly struck by their proposal to require the IRS to provide more detailed information in those math error notices.
Oh, yeah. Those are the worst.
Have you ever got one of those?
I have.
It's like the most frustrating thing.
It is so frustrating.
You get this notice saying you owe money,
Right.
but they don't tell you what the error was.
Exactly. You're like, what did I do wrong?
Exactly. And it feels like you're guilty until proven innocent.
Totally.
So requiring the IRS to be more transparent about these errors
Yeah.
would really help taxpayers understand what's going on.
And resolve the issue quickly and efficiently.
Exactly.
Right?
And I was also really interested in their recommendations for strengthening taxpayer rights before the Office of Appeals.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
So this is about making sure that taxpayers have a fair chance to present their case
Right.
and challenge IRS decisions.
Especially when those decisions could have a big impact on their finances.
Exactly. It's about leveling the playing field
Yeah.
and making sure that individuals have the tools and resources they need to navigate this system.
An advocate for themselves.
Exactly. It's all about empowering taxpayers,
Right.
not intimidating them.
Not making them feel like they're powerless.
And you know what's really inspiring?
What's that?
Some of the taxpayer advocates' recommendations from previous years
Yeah.
have actually been enacted into law.
That's amazing.
It shows that change is possible
It does.
and that persistence pays off.
They even have an appendix in the back of the book
Oh, really?
listing all the prior recommendations that have been successfully implemented.
Wow. So they're actually making a difference.
They're getting things done.
That's awesome. What are some of the highlights?
Well, for example, they were instrumental in enacting the Taxpayer Bill of Rights,
Oh, wow.
which we talked about earlier.
Hmm.
And they also successfully advocated for requiring the IRS to provide taxpayers with a single point of contact.
Oh, that's huge.
So you're not getting bounced around.
From department to department.
Yeah, when you have a question or a problem.
Oh, my gosh. I can't imagine how frustrating that must have been before.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
They've also made significant progress in improving the IRS's identity theft procedures
Okay.
and helping victims of tax-related identity theft.
So they're really looking out for people.
They are. They're on the front lines of addressing these emerging issues.
Yeah. It's clear that they're not just focused on fixing problems within the IRS itself,
Right.
but on improving the overall experience
Yeah, for taxpayers.
for taxpayers at every stage of the process.
They're really taking a holistic approach.
Exactly. So after diving deep into this purple book with you,
Yeah.
I'm left with a lot to think about.
Me too. It's a lot to digest.
What are some of the most provocative thoughts you're walking away with?
I think for me, it's the sheer volume of issues they've identified.
Yeah.
It really highlights the complexity of the tax system
Hmm.
and the need for ongoing reform.
Yeah, it can feel kind of overwhelming.
Does.
Like, how are we ever going to fix all of this?
It makes you realize how much work still needs to be done
Yeah,
to create a tax system that is truly fair, efficient, and equitable for all.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
What else is sticking with you?
I'm also really struck by the taxpayer advocate's unwavering commitment
Yeah.
to taxpayer rights.
They're like the David going up against the Goliath of the IRS.
Exactly, and they're proving that even small actions can make a difference.
That's a really good point.
Which brings me to my final thought.
Okay.
Don't underestimate the power of your own voice.
I love that.
You know?
What can listeners do to get involved in this conversation?
Well, I would encourage everyone to read the Purple Book for themselves. It's
Yeah.
available online for free.
Oh, awesome.
And it's surprisingly accessible,
Even if you're not a tax expert.
even if you're not a tax expert.
Good to know.
And once you've read it,
Yeah.
share your thoughts with your elected representatives.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Let them know which recommendations you support and why.
Yeah, that's a great way to make your voice heard.
And remember, even small actions can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Contact your representatives, write letters to the editor,
Mm-hmm.
talk to your friends and family about these issues.
Yeah, spread the word.
Exactly. The more we talk about these issues,
Yeah.
the more likely we are to see positive change.
I love, okay, so we've explored the Purple Book's recommendations for everything,
Yeah.
from refund processing to penalties,
Mm-hmm.
from simplifying tax credits to protecting victims of scams.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to digest.
It is, but I hope listeners take away from this that the taxpayer advocate is on their side,
Yes.
fighting to make the tax system work better for them.
They're like your tax fairy godmother.
Exactly. They're
Yeah.
a valuable resource and a powerful ally in the often intimidating world of taxes.
Yes. It's like knowing you have someone in your corner who's looking out for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, time for one final provocative thought
For me.
for our listeners to ponder. We've talked a lot about the taxpayer advocate pushing for a fairer system.
Right.
But what does fairness really mean when it comes to taxes?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right.
Is it about everyone paying the same amount,
Regardless of their income.
regardless of their income?
Or was it about those who earn more contributing more?
Right. Or is it about ensuring the system provides support for those who need it most
Right.
while still encouraging economic growth
Yeah.
and opportunity for everyone?
There are so many different perspectives on what a fair tax system looks like.
It's a question that's been debated for centuries.
Mm.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think the Purple Book provides a framework
Yeah.
for having that conversation.
For having that conversation in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
By bringing like real life examples to the table
Yeah,
and potential solutions.
exactly.
It's not just about abstract principles.
Right.
It's about how those principles translate into policies
Mhm.
that impact people's lives.
And I think that's what makes the Purple Book so compelling.
Yeah.
It's not just a dry policy document.
Right.
It's a reflection of the values we hold as a society.
It challenges us to think critically about those values. And how they're reflected in the way we tax ourselves.
Absolutely. So as you're thinking about the recommendations in the Purple Book,
Yeah.
ask yourself,
Mm-hmm.
what vision of a just and equitable society
Right.
Do these proposals reflect?
And do they align with your own vision
Yeah,
of a fair and prosperous future?
for all Americans.
That's the real deep dive, isn't it?
It is.
Beyond the numbers and the policies,
Yeah.
it's about what kind of world we want to create
Exactly.
and the role that taxes play in shaping that world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation for me.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding, not just of the tax system itself,
Right.
but also of the values and priorities
Yeah,
that underpin it.
absolutely. And I hope listeners feel empowered
Yeah.
to engage in this
So
conversation
get involved.
and advocate for a tax system
Yeah.
that reflects their own values.
Because at the end of the day, taxes aren't just about money.
No, they're not.
They're about what we value as a society.
And how we choose to invest in our collective future.
That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the Purple Book.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has. And to our listeners,
Yes.
keep asking those tough questions
Keep pushing for a better system.
and keep the conversation going.